Hello, this is Peter August. I'm the science advisor for the Watch Hill Conservancy. And the purpose of this video is to review for you some of the sources of flooding on Fort Road and our current thinking and how we're going to mitigate this flooding on Fort Road. The work that I'm presenting is the work of a number of people, Beth Bean and Grant Simmons with the Park Commission in the Watch Hill Fire District have helped put all this together, as has Deborah Lamb, the president and chair of the Watch Hill Conservancy, Jocelyn Leahy, the executive director, and Janice Sassy, the manager of Napa Tree Point. I also want to acknowledge the great input that we've received from Dr. Brian Oakley at Eastern Connecticut State University. He's been a valuable source of information on coastal geology. And many of the engineering ideas that we're presenting here are the result of input from Scott Rabideau and Bob Fairbanks. And so to the team, I'm grateful for their contributions, and let's get going. There's three sources of flooding on Fort Road and the entrance to Napa Tree that I want to quickly present to you. And for each one of these sources, we're going to discuss the issue, some of the work that's happened, what we anticipate the solution to be. So let's get on with it. Let's start with the entrance to the Napa Tree Point Conservation Area. This is a photograph of the entrance to Napa Tree when the tide is 1.24 feet above mean higher high water. Mean higher high water is a vertical datum, a reference point that we use to measure tides. It is the average of the highest of the two high tides each day over an 18-year period. So zero mean higher high water is a typical high tide elevation. And when we get positive numbers like 1.24 feet, this is a foot higher than our typical high tide. This level of high tide occurred on 21 days in 2019, and as you can tell, there is no dry foot access to Napa Tree, and certainly getting an ATV on Napa Tree for emergency response would be impossible without driving through salt water. We have determined that when a tide is 1 foot above mean higher high water, foot access, dry foot access to Napa Tree is not possible. Tides greater than a half a foot mean higher high water, you can't get ATV access without driving through salt water. And in this table down here, I show the frequency of these tidal extents over the last couple of years, and these are data taken from the USGS tide gauge in Watch Hill Harbor. And you can see that we hit that half a foot above mean higher high water from 86 to 143 days a year, and we meet or exceed that 1 foot above mean higher high water 24 to 50 days a year. So these extreme tides are quite common. And in fact, I'm pointing your attention to this graph here on the right. When we go back 70, 80 years, these are NOAA data. This green line is the increasing rate of nuisance tides over this period. And so these nuisance tides, these extremely high tides, are coming more and more frequently. And in fact, when you look at nuisance tide data for the whole country, southern New England has the greatest frequency of nuisance tides of anywhere else. And that includes New London, Montauk, certainly Little Narragansett Bay, Watch Hill Harbor, Providence, and Boston. So this is a problem that's going to be increasing more and more as the years go on. This graph, we have taken a bunch of measurements of the dry width of the entrance to Napa Tree versus tide. And here you can see that at 1/2 foot above mean high water, the width of the Napa Tree entrance is about 7 feet. And at that point, you just can't get the ATV on and be on dry sand. When the tide hits 1 foot, the width of Napa Tree is about from 0 to 2 feet wide, and that precludes anybody walking. And so nuisance tides are coming more often, and we've done a lot of measurements to understand what the critical thresholds of nuisance tides are on Napa Tree. Let me show you a couple of videos and animations that I think will really drive this home. And so I'm going to go into my hyperlink here. I'm going to say open hyperlink. I'm going to say OK. I'm going to minimize this, and the video will start coming up in a minute here. Here we go. So this is a series of time-lapse images taken by Dr. Brian Oakley in May 2019. I want to point out, look how calm this water is. This isn't any kind of storm event. This is a regular high tide. And as the tide comes in, you can see people are just either hugging the elevated area up here by the fence to the Misquamicut Club or just wading through the water. And so this really shows that nuisance tide in action. I'm going to cancel out of this now. I think that you've seen enough. We're going to come back into PowerPoint. Let me show you a similar time lapse of the area around the yacht club. I'm going to fire this one up, and let's bring in our Blu-ray viewer. Same thing, pictures taken every 10 or 15 minutes by Dr. Oakley. And you can see we have a little puddle here in front of the yacht club. The puddle is getting bigger and bigger. We're now at about 6:30 at night on the 16th of May. And as the evening goes on, we get more water coming down the entrance to the yacht club, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute. And that source of water at the yacht club entrance is the source of most of the flooding that you see here. Any cars driving through this or driving through salt water, I'm not sure the drivers know how bad an idea that is, but the flooding gets pretty extensive down here under extreme tidal conditions. Let me show you what that yacht club entrance looks like during flood conditions. I'm going to say OK. We're going to bring our little animation viewer up here. This is not subtle. This is there's a lot of water coming down that ramp, and as you can tell, you wouldn't have to be in this condition very long before that parking lot, the Fort Road and the parking lot get pretty darn flooded. One more that I want to show you, and I find this one particularly interesting. This is a result of some great detective work by Grant Simmons. And Grant has found that a source of flooding into the Fort Road lot is coming from the seam where the seawall and the road meet and cracks in the seawall. So I'm going to open up our viewer here. And this is one of the seeps. This is one of the seeps in the at the seam between the road and the seawall. And you can, this isn't just a wet spot. We have water really kind of pouring through here. I'm going to back off with the camera a bit so you can check this out. And the good news about this is a relatively easy fix, but I'm going to address that in a little bit. So Napa Tree entrance. This flooding at Napa Tree is an issue because the fire district and the Conservancy work hard to keep this an accessible public resource all year round. This is certainly a mandate to the conservation easement that the Conservancy has. And it's a public safety issue too. On many times over the course of the year, there is a need to bring an emergency response ATV out to deal with injured people, dangerous conditions, and stuff like that. And driving the ATV through salt water is not a great idea. So there are a lot of reasons why we need to deal with this Napa tree flooding issue now. We can't put it off. Another thing I wanted to show you was what the general elevations are around here. As you can see, this is the northwest corner of the Beach Club parking lot. You're looking at 5 to 6 feet elevation. When you get down on the edge of the sand entrance here to Napa Tree, you're around 1.5 to 1.3 to 1.1 feet above mean high water elevation. When you get down to the entrance to Napa Tree, you're going from 0 to about 0.8 feet elevation. And this is where we're coming up with those numbers. You know, when we hit 0.5 feet, the wetline's going to be right about here. And when you hit 1 foot, the wetline's going to be right about there. And so the elevation to the entrance to Napa Tree is pretty low. And so our solution to this is to build up the entrance with sand and natural products to an elevation of about 3.5 feet. This will buy us about 15 years, and this solution will be able to accommodate yet another foot of sea level rise that we anticipate coming in that time period. The sand would be enclosed in coconut fiber bags. These are biodegradable. If you keep them covered out of the sunlight, they should last 15 years. And we will border the coconut fiber bags with a stone revetment on the bayside edge to protect that elevated surface from wave action and that sort of thing. The beach club side will plant with vegetation, bayberry, rose, dune grass, to keep sand from blowing into the beach club parking lot and to kind of maintain that rustic feel. Here's how we came up with our 3.5 foot elevation target. As you saw on a previous slide, the existing elevation goes from 0 to 1 foot. This is existing, and what we're going to do is we're going to build that up to about 3 feet with these core bags, the coconut fiber bags, and put 6 inches of overtopping sand on top of that to protect the core bags from sunlight and to have an aesthetically pleasing entrance. The stone revetment is not a wall as shown here, but it's going to look something like this. Here is the Napa Tree entrance on a normal tide, mean sea level down here, but when we get super high tides or surges, you can see that the water is coming up and eroding away. By building this up and adding a stone revetment, that stone revetment will keep the water from overtopping the core bags with sand. I might note that by using proper size stones here, we're not only going to protect the Napa Tree entrance from wave action, but we're going to be creating a lot of complex structure that will be beneficial to wildlife, crabs and mussels and fish and that sort of thing. And so we call this a semi-natural living shoreline, and all the materials are natural materials, and there's some actual benefit in having that stone there. A couple of pictures of these core bags, how they're filled up. And so that's the Napa Tree problem, and that's the Napa Tree solution. I've shown you the flooding that's coming off the yacht club entrance. That video that I showed you was taken standing right here. Here's the water flowing into Fort Road. And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to understand what the problem is here. The elevation where my cursor is at this moment is 0.8 feet. Whenever a tide hits 0.8 feet above mean high water, water is going to start seeping over the entrance ramp into Fort Road here. In this particular picture, the tide was 1.34 feet above mean high water. That's a lot of water coming through. This level of flooding happened 17 days in 2019. The frequency with which we get 0.8 feet above mean high water is around 37 to 70 days per year. It happens pretty often. And this is a significant source of flooding to Fort Road. Just to give you a feel for the elevations in this part of Fort Road, you can see they're really actually quite low. At the base of the wall, we even get below mean high water, the minus 0.1. These larger numbers are the top of the seawall running right here, and they go from about 2.5 to 2.5 feet. So the elevations, especially in the roadbed, are quite low, and I'm going to revisit that in a minute. So the issue here with the yacht club is we need to fill in this low point in the seawall. That's going to be the solution, to kind of build up the seawall so it's flush, and to re-engineer the entrance ramp to the yacht club so people can walk in, and it's going to have to be carefully done to maintain ADA compliance. We also have to be careful not to damage the utilities that come into the yacht club underneath the entrance ramp. So that's what that solution is going to be. The third source of flooding is, as I mentioned, seeps at the junction of the road and the seawall, and also the asphalt here in a couple of spots in Fort Road has become damaged with the water surging up underneath it and then draining down. The road itself, and you saw the low elevations, the road itself is a source of flooding. In this photograph, we're at 1.25 feet above mean high water. We hit this level of inundation 21 days in 2019. So we have overwashing at the yacht club, we have seepage and cracks in the seawall and the junction of the seawall. The drain pipes in the seawall is pretty well resolved now. Grant Simmons has been doing a lot of experimentation with one-way valve systems. We need to let water come off the parking lot during rain events and flow into Watch Hill Harbor, but we don't want water from Watch Hill Harbor flowing in to Fort Road, and Grant has done a good job figuring out the best designs for those one-way valves. The ramifications of the Fort Road flooding down here are obvious. You can't get to Napa Tree, the yacht club, the cabanas, and the beach club without driving through salt water. As the road continually floods and drains of salt water, it's damaging the structural integrity of the roadbed, and we don't have pedestrian access during extreme events. A lot of fixes to this. Mr. Simmons has pretty much solved this issue with the drain pipes and using appropriate one-way duckbill valves. Last summer, a lot of work was done to seal those seeps in the seawall. We will keep vigilant to that, and we need to do some work on the Fort Road surface near the yacht club to prevent that from continued flooding. So I hope you found this very quick overview helpful to understand the problem and the fixes that we're looking to do over the next year to solve this problem. This isn't a can that we can kick down the road. It's impeding public access, public safety now, and now is the time to mitigate these problems. Okay, hope you found this helpful.